All right, we're going to go ahead and get started here. I think everybody can keep joining in as they come along. Today, I see that from AIVRTTAC, we have Jamie, Winona, Lee, and that's just off the quick top. John is going to be, he's the one that's listed as AIVRTTAC. Oh, we got some HOMA folks on here. Good to see you, Luis. It's good to have people from all over. Anyways, back to AIVRTTAC. We got some staff here with us. Lee and Winona and Jamie are going to be supporting us in the chat box. And so if you have any questions, please throw those in there. Today, we're going to talk about IPE development. And this I'm going to give you a little bit of background. This was first originally developed to be a presentation at KNR. So it was a hands-on, face-to-face type learning situation. From there, we developed it into a three-part IPE series. And this time we decided to be really ambitious and put it into a 90-minute presentation. So we'll see how far we can get. We might end up breaking this bad boy up into a couple sections and coming back and revisiting it. The IPE is such a critical point that we want to make sure that we have the time to work on it and everybody can get a really good understanding. So if we have to come back, I'm okay with that. We'll schedule another time and get that set up for everybody. In the beginning here, I'd like to take just a few minutes and let Lee open us in a good way today. So Lee, can you please open us in a good way?
Good morning, everyone. This is Lee Yashoma. I'm with the AIVRTTAC and I'm a member of the Hopi tribe. And at this time, I will provide a short prayer in Hopi. You may also offer your prayers to God or Creator as you recognize Him during the prayer. Wakatawa ove umbi itamumi nama takana se'en itahala itote umi yorik yaka. Nakobi itayabiasa nakbilsubalti obi umitamumitanat yadak itaitumalay alang todani and itasin moy katiyam moy au buho todani obi ita kanayu na kyakyan itasayan ya kyakyan itatumalay au ansas nani pa obi hakyantani kwakwa.
Oh, thank you, Lee, for your opening prayer. Okay, everybody, we're going to jump in here. I'm going to share my screen. We'll get the PowerPoint up and running. And get this thing underway. All right, Jamie and everybody on AIVRTTAC team, when I do the PowerPoint, it goes into the presenter view and I lose my chat box. So please, if the chat box has questions, stop me, interrupt me, or raise your hand and I'll address it. All right, so we're going to go through this, and I'm probably going to go through some of this stuff pretty fast. Again, the instructions, we've all been on Zoom 100 times already, and John already covered part of that. So we're not going to really worry about that stuff. The learning outcomes, here's where we get into some of the meat and potatoes. And like I said, we broke this up from 3 different presentations. So the first section of learning outcomes that we're going to be looking at is we want to recognize the basic components and required sections of the IPE. We want to understand how to incorporate the components and the required sections into your final IPE. And we want to achieve increased knowledge on how to develop and implement the IPE with an eligible participant or consumer. A couple of things that we're going to look at here as we go through these PowerPoint slides. I want you to recognize that we did put a lot of language in here. This has been worked on from AIVRTTAC side and also been approved and vetted by RSA, the AIVRS RSA project or program officers. And so I'm not going to go verbatim off of these slides. It's too much reading, and these slides will be up for everybody to access as at a later point. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run through and talk about IPE components. When you start developing an IPE, the first thing you want to look at with your participant is you have to select an employment goal. And that employment goal, I take this time always to talk about where it connects to the rest of the case file. When you are determining eligibility of your participant, you identify what the primary disabilities are in that individual's situation. You also look at some secondary disabilities at times if they're present. The employment goal cannot require that individual to utilize their disabilities limitations or ignore their disabilities limitations. We cannot create an employment goal that sets that individual up to harm themselves in the future. And an example of that would be somebody with a back injury wanting to work in the oil field as a deckhand. It's not going to happen. There's too much lifting. There's too many lifting requirements that their limitations won't allow them to do. So we couldn't support that in AIVRS project. We couldn't support an employment goal of that nature. The services have to be provided to reach that employment goal. So we have to identify that we're going to provide services to assist in removing those barriers to employment. We have to identify who's going to be providing those services. We have to identify responsibilities of the consumers, the AIVRS project, and the collaborating agency. So if you have anybody that's partnering with you, you have to make sure you identify them. And then you have to show how your progress is going to be measured. And throughout all of this, the other piece that you have to identify, it's in the first line up here, is the informed choice of the consumer. We have to always identify and allow that individual to choose the services, the service provider, the employment goal, and the agencies they're working with. So that doesn't mean that we have to agree to it and provide those services. They can choose any goal they want. That's where the counseling comes in as a VR counselor. We have a discussion about, does this meet your disability criteria? Does it allow you to maintain longevity in that career? So that's the type of questions you start to ask yourself as you're developing that IPE with your participant. Requirements for developing an IPE. It needs to be written, it needs to be provided in writing and an appropriate mode of communication. So you have to make sure that if we have a native speaker and that's their first language, we provide it to them in that language. If we have somebody that's blind and they request Braille, we provide it in Braille. Those are all the requirements of providing it in writing to that participant. It is developed and implemented in a timely manner. Now, under state VR, there's some timelines that are in place, and from eligibility to IPE development, the state is required to develop that IPE within 90 days. We don't have that same restriction under the CFR 371, so we say it's a best practice. This is what allows you to manage your caseload and keep that case moving forward by having some of these timelines. It's not a requirement. However, we do recommend it as a best practice. We have to identify that the services will be provided as outlined in the IPE. We have to basically do what we say. So if we say that we're going to provide job search assistance, helping fill out applications, maybe practicing some interview stuff, if it's in the IPE, we have to identify how we're going to provide that and how we're going to support that. Excuse me. This also includes your amendments to the IPE. When you're developing your IPE, you want to try and look as far ahead as you can. You want to try and capture all the services that might help this individual remove barriers to employment. But if we see something or we don't catch something or something changes with their disability and we have a new situation arise, we can amend that IPE. And you just do a case note showing the amendment, justifying why it needs to be changed. And then you put in the changes of that IPE, and then the consumer signs it or the participant signs it, and you move forward with it again. So when we look at all these things, the grade 8 come into play. And people go, what's the grade 8? Well, it's just such a long sentence. I don't like to read it, so I shorten it to the grade 8. And it's the last one. We have to take into account the individual's unique strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, capabilities, and informed choice. That's a mouthful. That's why I say grade 8. So every IPE has to take that into account. That's a piece of it. We have to make sure that we address it every single time when we're developing that IPE. So part of the IPE development is the partnership that's created with your participant. The eligible participant has a say in it. They negotiate with you and develop a solid plan to move forward. So we have to identify the information that's provided to that individual. We have to provide them options for developing an IPE, which can be a bunch of different options available. So they can do it individually. They can do it with another VR counselor that isn't employed by the AIVRS project. They can do it with an advocate. They can do it with their auntie or uncle or sister, brother, whatever. They can have anybody in the room they want as long as it doesn't hinder the VR case. That's the one stipulation that AIVRS projects can put in that arena. If the individual coming in to support our participant hinders our VR progress, we can ask that individual to leave. More information is, I kind of covered it in the first one too, is we have information to assist the eligible participant or representative in developing an IPE. So this includes the full range of components. We have to tell them every opportunity that is available for them in developing this IPE. We can provide them with explanations of AIVRS guidelines and criteria for determining eligible consumers' financial contribution, availability for help in filling out forms, relevant information for completing the IPE. All these things need to be provided. A description of the rights and remedies available to the consumer. This is also known within your office probably as the appeal process. Description of the availability of CAP or client assistance program. Every state has a client assistance program. We are required to provide our participants with their phone number and other means of contact. Sometimes this line gets a little bit blurred, and we have I've seen where people are really explaining the services of CAP. That's okay, but remember, CAP isn't always our friend. A lot of times CAP is on the other side of us saying that we need to provide these large ticket items for our participant. And we're on the other side saying, no, it's not feasible. So while it can be a friendly relationship, it's not a tight relationship, so to speak. And just remember that we aren't obligated to go beyond explaining the basic services of CAP, how to contact them, and then moving on. We also need to discuss the SSDI or SSI benefits. We need to provide information on how these additional supports and services can help that individual move forward in the plan, such as benefits planning. If we have somebody that's on SSDI or SSI, we can send them to a benefits planner and they can outline the income impact for SSDI or SSI, and they can help us set up a plan. In some situations, we can even get help setting up past plans for SSI people or people with SSI. Some of the mandatory components of an IPE. We have to have a description of the specific employment outcome or goal. This one we've seen historically come across, and it's really important that we take time to understand that when we talk about an employment outcome or an employment goal, it is a job, not a description of services to get to a job. And a lot of times in our IPEs, when we've worked with people, we've seen that they'll put in a 4-year college degree or a bachelor's degree or associate's degree or truck driver's training, CDL training as an employment outcome goal. And that is incorrect. Those are services to get that individual to employment. Okay, so in the case of the CDL training, the employment outcome or the employment goal would be over the road truck driver or long haul truck driver or dump truck driver. any of those type of titles would be the employment goal. The service to get that individual into that position would be the CDL training. And so if you have any questions on that, please put it in the chat box. That's something that I will spend the rest of our time together explaining, because it's such a vital piece of it. We have to, again, take into account the grade 8 as we're going through that component, or those mandatory components. We also have to have a description of the required services. So we need to identify what services are being provided to remove barriers to employment. Now, one of the main services that every AIVRS project will always provide is counseling and guidance. That should be identified on most, if not all, of your IPEs that you develop, because we have to help these participants adjust to their disability. Counseling and guidance is probably the easiest service to identify on any IPE. We have to identify assistive technology. There has to be, it can be a checkbox, yes or no. This assistive technology, yes or no. This, we also have to identify personal assistance services. This individual needs a PA for getting dressed to attend interviews or work settings. Another check yes or no box. We have to identify timelines for achievement of an employment outcome and the provision of services. So as we develop our IPE, we got to be looking at what services are we providing to this individual to get them work ready. How long do you think we're going to be working with this individual before they obtain employment? And then remember, we have to account for the 90 days follow along to support them. And the 90 days follow along is a minimum. It's not 90 and cut it off and be done. It's 90, and if they still need support, we hang around for another 20, 30 days, right? So just keep that in mind. It's not a hard and fast number all the time. We have to provide that follow along support for a minimum of 90 days. So when you're developing your timeline of your IPE, that all comes into play. So if we're doing, let's say real quick, we're doing an associate's degree. We're helping somebody get their associate's degree. And then we're gonna help them find an employment setting or a job. So that's gonna take probably another 3 months. And then we got to follow them along for 90 days, right? So that's another 3 months. So we're looking at 2.5 years, give or take, in this IPE before we get into employment. So when you would write your end date of your IPE, you'd be set it out there about 2.5 years. And again, this end date you can amend as needed. Let's say their disability flares and they miss a quarter, and then they have to go back and retake some courses. That's okay. We can accommodate that through an amendment to the IPE. We would amend the services and we'd amend the end date of the IPE. Now, each service also has to have a start and end date. So we have a timeline of service provision. And it's very important that we individualize these services. If we just put down a block that we're going to provide gas for transportation costs to assist in getting to a training facility, and that is going to last 6 weeks, but we do it for the life of the IPE, that individual can come back and request that gas allowance or gas assistance throughout the life of the IPE instead of just the 6 weeks that we offered it for training. So it's very important that we individualize those service start and end dates as well. We need to provide a description of the vendors providing services. We need to identify who's doing what and what part and who's responsible for paying for it. Now, most of the time it's the AIVRS project or our partner. Once in a while, we'll get some participation from a participant. That depends on what the services are and how you set it up. We also have to have the description of methods. And again, I just covered it all in one sentence. So sometimes when I get to rambling, I cover more things than what's on the paper. We also have to have the criteria to evaluate progress. How are we going to show that this individual is making forward progress in their IPE and that they're actually going to obtain employment or complete the training to obtain employment? We need to talk about responsibilities of the participant and the AIVRS program. We need to talk about the extent that the participant is going to participate in paying for rehab services. Are they able to pony up any money, or are they going to provide transportation to it? We aren't going to pay for the gas, they're going to pay for the gas type thing. We need to talk about comparable services and benefits. You need to identify who is doing what from each outside agency so that there's not duplication of service. And a huge piece that helps separate us from state VR is always our culturally appropriate services. Okay, so we bring in the culturally appropriateness, but when we start talking about traditional healing services, that is something that is separate from the state as well. And so we want to make sure that the opportunity for participants to engage in healing services, traditional healing services, are offered. It doesn't have to be captured in every single IPE, but it needs to be offered to that individual. Costs and responsibilities. We need to identify who's doing what and how much it's costing them, just to help track. Comparable services can be any accommodation, auxiliary aids, or services that are provided or paid for in whole or even pieces of it by other agencies or other offices or partners that we can bring in to stretch our funding sources. We also need to talk about supported employment because it is a component of the IPE. However, it's not something that AIVRS projects are able to fully provide independently. You can do let me back up. In most cases, you're looking at a shared case with the state agency because they have that long-term permanent funding in place to support that individual with significant to severe disabilities. Most AIVRS projects, if not all AIVRS projects, do not have the depth of funding to provide supported employment. So it's not one that we really have to be really active in providing because we don't have the funding available. But we do have to address it on every IPE. Again, it can be a checkbox, yes or no. If it is yes, then you need to describe in that IPE how it's going to be provided. That's the next slide, sorry. How it's going to be provided, who's providing it, for the length of time it's being provided, and the specific services that are being provided to support that individual in employment. And that's the next couple slides that we talked about here. Again, excuse me, the supported employment services will most likely be in a shared case with the state, and the state VR agency will have partnerships with other state disability related agencies to support that individual. I get so passionate about the IPE, it's just choking me up, I guess. It's really tough when you're making jokes and nobody's laughing. You can't hear anybody laugh. Kind of makes you get self-conscious for a little bit. That's all right.
We were laughing. You just couldn't hear us, Blaine.
The last piece of the identified or mandatory components is the post-employment services. On every IPE, we have to identify at the time of writing the IPE whether the individual is going to require post-employment services. 99.9% of the time, there's always an anomaly, right? There's the answer to post-employment services will be no. The 0.01% that it is yes, you have to identify what those services are, how much it's going to cost, length of time, and you need to justify why they're being provided to that individual. So an example of one that would be at the time of writing the IPE is I was working with a young man who wanted to do driver's training. However, he had to get some stuff under his belt before we could do the driver's training. He had to get some money coming in so that he could pay for fuel and insurance on his vehicle. The program that he was with had purchased the vehicle. They just didn't have the funding to provide gas or insurance for that individual. So he had to find a job that would support that. And we wrote that into his plan, that once he got his employment, and had worked 3 months to save money to start paying for gas and insurance, then we would be closing his case is successfully closed, but we would immediately open up post-employment services to get him the driver's training. So he was able to maintain his employment. When we got to that point, we closed his case. We immediately did post-employment services under a post-employment IPE, and he got his driver's training. In that situation, it was feasible to write your post-employment services into the IPE. Most times what happens is the individual's case is closed, successfully employed. There's a change in their employment setting. They have to come back and they ask for services. And then we would start providing them those services under a post-employment plan. And we go along our merry way. I'm not going to go any deeper into the post-employment stuff because we can get lost pretty quick in the mud. But we will be talking about post-employment services in the VR process when we get to service provision. So we'll go into more of a detailed explanation of what those look like at that point. All right, so the comprehensive assessment process, what does this even mean when we start talking about comprehensive assessment? In a lot of cases, our brain immediately goes to a bunch of surveys or inventories or assessments that are done that compile all these individuals' abilities. Okay, that's a piece of it. When we talk about the comprehensive assessment process in IPE development, we're talking about the moment that individual walks into our office, from the initial intake through IPE development. We're looking at how that individual sits in the chair. What is their thinking process? Do they have a grasp on their limitations and their abilities? Is their vocational goal feasible? Do they have a factual basis or any type of rationale for their IPE goal and the services needed to get it? So these are all the things that we look at as we're going through and developing this IPE. And this is just a bulleted list of all the different things that we'd be looking at and a little bit of a timeline of when this comprehensive assessment starts. And again, as we get into another series of webinars that we're going to be hosting, we're going to be talking about, the competency, skills, and abilities of VR counselors and employment specialists and other VR staff. So we can really start delving in on some of the tips and techniques to do these types of activities. Right now, I just want you to be aware of what that looks like in a comprehensive assessment. So what does it include? It's, consumer self-reports, it's medical evaluations, psychological, psychiatric evaluations, pretty much anything that the medical field that they work with, the professional in the medical field they work with, will provide you supporting their diagnosis. Any traditional healers, any family members, consumer or participant self-reporting, all that information is brought into our assessment. We also can pull if they have a previous case with the project, we would pull that case and look at it and bring that into the new file as well. Case management is a huge part of it because we have to identify the connection of IPE to the eligibility. So when you develop your eligibility for the project, you have to identify the disabilities, but you also identify the barriers to employment, and you also identify the services that are going to remove those barriers to that employment. You have to show from that point all the way through service provision and successful employment, which is, the IPE development as part of that process. You have to show the connection of services to those eligibility services. What you write into your eligibility, you have to identify and provide in your IPE. If you don't provide those services in your IPE, you have to make a case note why you're not providing those services that you've identified in your eligibility statement. And that's why case management techniques or practices have to be talked about when we talk about IPE development. If we have a new disability that comes up and we're going to provide services in the IPE that are not connected to the eligibility, we have to write a rationale why we're providing these services on this, under this new disability or under the limitations of the new disability. So we have to always make sure that all of our stuff is connected and telling the story, even during IPE development. And here's the parts of case management that we are looking at: assessment, planning, facilitation, advocacy, quality control, stewards of money. When we look at IPE development, I want you to remember that it's part of planning. You know, it's a philosophy of how we approach these services or this IPE development. What are we looking for? How are we going to outline the process and the steps to get to that point? What are the things that we need to be aware of during that time? Okay, so now I want to stop. I'm going to stop sharing so that we can all see each other's faces, because we all like to look at each other. Well, most of us anyways, but I guess like 3 of us. Hey, Dottie, good to see your face. Been a long time. All right, so I want to take a minute and I'm going to open the floor, and I want you guys that have developed IPEs to give me just a brief rundown of some of your planning tips and techniques that you use in developing an IPE. So you can jump on and start talking. You can raise your hand. We can see it. But I want you guys to share your piece.
Yeah, this is Philip. A lot of our consumers are in the villages, and we can't just go there just to do an IPE. That's pretty costly. So a lot of times I just kind of look at the consumer's barriers to employment and then use my own creativity and develop it on my own, and then fax it or scan, email it for the consumer signature. And it works pretty well. And, you know, I have them read over it and see if they agree on it. And then also you were talking about assistive technology. Well, I had a consumer. Well, she wasn't a consumer at the time, but she was an applicant who was legally blind, and she couldn't see the letters on her computer screen. So I contacted the Assistive Technology here in Alaska, and they said to get her a computer and they'll program in what's called Zoom text. All that is beyond me. I don't know what the heck they're talking about, but it worked. So we had to get her a big enough computer that could store all that. And we ended up getting her a Lenovo. And then it turned out that in their tribe, the computers, well, the printer they had, she couldn't print off this computer we got her. So we had to get her a separate computer, separate printer. But it all worked out. She was able to continue working after that. So that was one of my successes.
That's great.
Yeah, I just thought I'd throw that in.
Thanks, Philip. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody else want to talk about their process for writing IPEs? I see in the timeline we got some stuff, or the chat line or chat box we got some stuff. I use a timeline so they can see how things progress. That was Carmela. That's a great idea. Kind of the VR process in a timeline format helps them stay on track and see forward movement. Gina states that she likes to read through everything that I receive, but then she likes to hear everything in their own words. Just because it is not on paper, or is on paper, does not necessarily make you understand the entire situation. It seems very helpful when working with them to make a better IPE plan. So hearing their side of it and hearing their take on it, that's a good one. Anybody else want to talk? Go ahead, Jamie.
I just wanted to say that I think it's very helpful in the beginning, in the planning process prior to writing or developing the IPE, is knowing any comparable benefits, any resources, knowing that ahead of time, a lot of times will delineate services, that could possibly, like transportation assistance. And if they have an auntie or a cousin or someone, that's willing and able to help with transportation or give them a ride, into town. If they have babysitting options within the family or the community, those are a lot of things that are really important to know in the beginning so that you, could use the funding for other services. So I always like to know, what comparable benefits are available to the individual. And I guess kind of adding on to that, if they are receiving any services from tribal health services or Indian health services, if they're receiving any type of assistance with medication, those type things are helpful to know. And also with mental health caseloads, just seeing a treatment plan gives you an idea if the individual is already ready and willing and able to participate on their end. Those are just some things that I look for.
Great. There's a bunch of stuff in the chat box. So Casey, can you unmute and just talk about what you put in the chat box, please? Oh shit, never, Mike. Sorry, I put you on the spot.
You want to go ahead and say what Casey said in the chat? Because that was some good information.
Go ahead, Jamie, I'll let you read that.
Okay, Casey said we have a program orientation where we have them complete assessments to get a better idea of what their situation is. We also use our application to gather information and past applications / case information if available. For the most part, we get enough information to have a good idea of what the IPE will look like by the time we have their IPE meeting to develop it. And that's good planning and strategizing, Casey. Rachel, you want to talk about your comment?
A lot of times Rachel is on not able to talk. So I am relieved to hear the 90 days for the IPE development is still considered a best practice and not a requirement. I thought I had seen or heard that as now a requirement. I have told people it is. So I need to apologize to somebody unnecessarily may have caused stress. I know I've struggled with this time constraint myself at times, so this is very helpful to be corrected on that. Sometimes it takes longer to explore, and I thought a written extension, just like if for eligibility, had to be in place if we went past 90 days now. So that when all this stuff was first starting to go down before the 371 was really fleshed out, and there's only like 3 pages of regulation. It was based off of the 361 regulation, which is the state VR CFR regulations, and it was in place at that time. So it was previously it was 60 days for eligibility, 90 days for IPE development. And if you're going to go over that 90 days, then you had to have a written extension in place explaining why you were going past 90 days. However, when WIOA came into effect and 371 was reauthorized during that changes, that was removed. So we are now saying it's best practice because it does take time. And it is some of the uniqueness of the AIVRS projects, right? So the rural settings, you know, in our reservations, the transportation is an issue. Like Philip had said earlier, where it's out in the villages and they got to travel out there, it's, you know, snowmobile, boat, or airplane, and it's really not a cost-effective way to manage that within 90 days. So there's a lot of different things that help us stay out of that 90-day loop. Michael put in here that we're working with consumer with learning disabilities. They're capable in their own learning style. Well, thanks, Rachel. We're gonna get you talking more and more, Rachel, since you always pick on me when I'm doing these things. We're gonna get you involved. Michael says he has a question about having supporting individuals that can be in the IPE development. So what exactly are you looking at, Michael? Do you have a situation that's specific, or is it just in general having people supporting you in the IPE meeting? Family members. Okay, so sorry about that. Family members in an IPE meeting, again, as long as they are not hindering the forward progression of the VR progress in the case, that individual can have anybody come in to their meetings with them. The only time it gets a little tricky is when we start talking about IPE development and minors or individuals that are under 18 years of age. Then we have to have their buy-in. However, they don't get to control the case. That is still our participants' position. And a lot of times that gets really uncomfortable when we're working with youth or individuals under 18, because mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, auntie, uncle have different ideas than what they have. You know, they a lot of times the family members are way more invested in that individual getting what they see as appropriate work or the dream job, and really the individual or the participant just really wants to flip burgers or, you know, wipe down tables at a cafe or something like that. So again, they're all welcome to come in. They don't really get to have a whole lot of say unless the participant allows them, and they can't hinder our VR process. Yeah, you're right. When we start talking about like developmental disabilities, that type of thing, intellectual disabilities, we get some really muddy waters about consumer informed choice, because some of those people have a difficult time identifying. So I'm trying to find the right words, identifying their informed choice, because maybe they're nonverbal, but I guarantee people that are nonverbal will let you know they can still communicate whether they like something or not. That's for sure.
Wayne?
Yeah.
Hey, it's Lyle. Good morning, good afternoon, whatever it is. To kind of give a little, well, I guess add on to what Mike's asking about, you know, there are consumers that are over the age of 18, but yet they're still under the guardianship of their parent or whoever. So, you know, how do you deal with that when they're kind of taking over the meeting and saying, well, I want this, I want that. And Mike, as a counselor, knows the person he's working with. He's capable of understanding and working with this consumer. But it's the parent that who has the guardianship is coming in and saying, I want this, I want that for him. You know, and that's, you know, as a parent, a lot of us are parents, and we want what's best for our children, but to the point where it interferes with Mike working successfully with the consumer.
Yeah, and so that's a great great question, and Earl also put that in there. What about when they have a court appointed guardianship? So in that same situation, even if they're over 18, we still have to look at that informed choice of our participant. And that individual is the one that is our client or our participant in our office. The guardian absolutely can participate. However, it goes back to that level of, are they hindering the progress? And if they are, we can ask them to step out and have an explanation, you know, have a discussion with them. And I know what that's like as a counselor, asking a parent to step out or a guardian to step out, especially when that's very, should we say, invested in that case or those services. It's very uncomfortable, but we just go back and we have to fall back on what our process is. And this is when we start talking about at this level, we also need to have something in our policy and procedures that identify our process in the IPE development service provision. And that's where that would fall under, you know, participants are the ones that we listen to, and that's who gives us informed choice. And we have to follow their grade 8, not the parents' grade 8 or the guardian's grade 8. It's what our participants want. And sometimes, you know, an explanation like that or a discussion like that can help move that forward. Other times, I've had to ask them to leave and wait in the waiting room. And as noted in the chat box, if we have that situation at the beginning, you'll have a release of information on file already, so that person, you can talk to them as needed. Did that help at all, Mike? Good deal. So
I have
Fallon,
a question. Excuse me.
Okay, go ahead.
This is Meredith. I'm with Hopi. I had a question regarding the IPE. What I use as a tool along with my IPE is what I call an action plan. And the action plan includes their objectives or their goals and what activity it's going to take to accomplish that one goal. And then a time frame and, you know, showing how they're successful in accomplishing that. So I use it as a tool, but I had one instance with a consumer who we did a IPE, and one of their objectives was they want to be an EMT, but they had anxiety, some slight anxiety issues. And I wanted them to do ride-alongs. So we put it into the action plan, you know, to do so many ride-alongs to determine whether or not that would be a huge hindrance to what their disability was. In the end, they grieved doing that, and because according to our director, it wasn't written in the actual IPE itself, so it was not something that that individual had to abide by. So in the IPE itself, do I have to be very descriptive in those objectives that I would like for them to work towards?
Yes, when you get to the point of writing down the objectives or the activities or responsibilities of the participant, yes, it does require you to be very, very descriptive. However, what you just explained to me would fall under an assessment, because we have to assess that individual's ability to participate in that employment. And so having them do a ride along is absolutely something that you can require as an assessment prior to the development of the IPE. If they agree to do it, great. If they say, no, I'm not going to do it. And then at that point, you'd have a discussion about, well, I can't agree to provide these services without this knowledge beforehand. And so while the consumer is the one that directs our VR cases, or the participant directs the cases, it is the VR counselor and VR director's responsibility to agree or disagree. So we aren't required to provide services if we don't agree with the path that the individual is going on. It goes back to the rule of he who has the gold or she who has the gold makes the rules. Okay. So if I'm paying for something in an IPE, I get to set down whether I am going to do it or not. And that's the position of the VR counselor and director. We take in informed choice. We take that into consideration. We provide it, and we provide them every opportunity to have a voice in their case because they direct what happens in that case. But that doesn't mean we have to go along with something that's not appropriate or feasible. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. So the reason why we kind of did it backwards was because she was already a former consumer, well, actual consumer of my previous counselor, and it transferred over to me, and she changed her goal at that time. And she wanted to be an EMT, and that just made the process a little more difficult for me. So I had used the action plan to go through these other steps to make sure we were doing the right process for the IPE.
Right, and I agree with that now. Okay, so now that we've established it's an active plan, before I amend your plan to a new goal, I want to make sure that you can do the job before we go there. In that situation, it's 100% appropriate to ask for that person to do those steps.
Okay, thank you.
Earl, I see your hand is raised.
Hi. So I'm bringing it back to the guardianship thing because I'm going to take this time to get information from you guys. So does the guardian have to sign the IPE? Do they have to be in agreement to it? Because if they're court-appointed guardianship for one reason or another, I guess the individual, the client, can't make decisions on their own. So does the guardian have to be in some type of agreement? Do we need to have them sign as well? That was my understanding, just logically thinking, but I'm not sure.
So in that situation, I usually have 2 signing spots, and I have the participant sign because it's their IPE and it's their case. And then I would have the guardian sign as well. And then I would provide each a copy.
Right. So what if the guardian and the client are not in agreement?
Jamie, thoughts?
Sorry, this is going to be my situation.
Yeah, well, ultimately, the consumer, the participant, is the one that's going to be completing the employment goal, correct?
Yes.
So you can't say, well, the guardian wants them to do this, so therefore this is what we're going to do. You're going to always have to work with the two in a way that the consumer or the participant's wishes are what you're fulfilling. Now, if the guardian, this is kind of how I looked at it as a counselor, if the guardian is providing all of the support and resources for that individual to reach their employment goal, then there have to be considerations on the guardian's part as well. But ultimately, the consumer, the participant's wishes are what you're trying to accomplish and achieve, their employment goal. Now, are there questions about, you know, should they go to work at 9 a.m. versus 9 p.m.? Or the distance to one location is closer than the distance to another location. You know what I mean? The minutia is sometimes you can work out the details, but ultimately I feel like that we're there to assist the consumer in their employment goal. So
Right.
that's kind of how I look at it.
So I was just thinking more like in legality wise, like what would be the right thing if they're under guardianship?
Well, it goes back to, see, I asked Jamie to talk because she does it more eloquently than I do. Because I'd be like, I can't do anything then. You know, if you're refusing to allow this to happen, we can't serve your individual. Sorry. And that's really what it comes down to, because it's all about the participants' grade 8. It's their
Right.
informed choice. It's their choice. It's their what their strengths are. It's what their abilities are. So at the end of the day, the signature is the participant's signature or mark. Like I've had some people that can't write their name, so they give me a legal mark, which is recorded as their mark. In the guardians, you know, usually when we get to that point of the process, it's a really frank conversation that I have with the guardian, and I ask them right out front, why are you blocking your individual from moving forward with their life? You know, and I explain to them that they're becoming more of a barrier to this person's independency and quality of life improvement. And that's usually where the conversation goes. And then there's a level of understanding. And it's really uncomfortable. I don't envy you for a minute, Earl.
Well, that helped me a lot. Thank you, guys.
You bet. Rachel also points out that it can vary from state to state as far as guardianship's reach. Some states' power of attorney covers different things than other states. So that's something to take into account too. And then we also get into tribal law, right? What's the tribal perspective of this guardianship, and where does it shake out through the tribe?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, it has to be worked out between the guardian and the individual. You know, are they willing to support each other and each other's ideas? Is the guardian willing to support the individual's employment goal? So that, I mean, there has to be give and take on both sides. I wanted to get over to a question that Melinda put in here. She wanted to talk about vocational evaluations and assessments. What did we recommend as far as aptitude, interest, and things like that? So I thought at first that Melinda was asking about an educational assessment. So I recommended that any assessments from the school or a psychological evaluation or assessment or any type of educational assessments. But then I realized she was actually talking about vocational assessments. So I felt like Jan or ONET would be a good place to start. But Bettina said that they use software called Career Cruising. You want to talk about that, Bettina? Uh-oh.
How about,
Bettina,
how about
might-
Fallon? Are you guys in the same room, Fallon? Because maybe you can talk about it since you work with her.
Hello. No, we're not in the same room, but we're in the same office.
Okay.
I'm here with our other counselor, Tanya Barocco. So we use Career Cruising, and it's basically over 100 questions about dislikes and likes. of what our consumers would do in regards to a career. And then it gives us 40 jobs based on their matches when they answer about their skills compared to their interest. And we have a list of jobs and we go through that, and that's how we assess pretty much that part of it. I don't know, Tanya, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, they are asked like 100 questions, and they rate it on a scale from it doesn't matter to very much like to very much dislike, like on a scale of 1 to 5 type of thing. And it's also taken into consideration their education, yeah, and their skills and all different factors. And then it spits out like the 40 top jobs for them with different ratings of what they might be best at. That's all.
Thank you. Gina states that they go with, for voc assessments, they go through the state of Oklahoma. But you didn't know how other states do this. They have a good relationship, so that's good. Casey, did you want to add something? I saw you put your camera on.
Yes, I have my mic set up finally. We use Career Scope. It's about an hour to do, and it's on the computer. So if any of our clients have internet access, they can do it from wherever they are. It just has to be on a laptop. And it works really well with us working with the school because we can just send them the link and our students can do it at school. So they don't have to do it outside of school hours. And so our Career Scope does an interest inventory, it does an aptitude assessment, and then it puts them together and uses ONET to do a match. And then it'll list out all the career matches that it has. So that's what we've been using lately. We also have pen and paper too. We use the transition to work inventory. We have, I think, like RIASEC we use for outreach when we're out at maybe job fairs and people just want to do a quick one. It's only a couple questions, so that one's really easy. It just depends on our client's skill level too. If they have a low reading level, we'll use a lower level assessment, or like the Career Scope is a little more sophisticated, so we do that a lot with our transition students.
Meredith wants to know if the Career Scope is a free source.
No, it is not. I think I don't know how much it is this year, but it's about $295 for a they call it a portal. That's just ours that we use. It's kind of how do I put this? It's like a subscription service. And then you can purchase it kind of as you go, and it does carry over. So we just decided as a program that was best for us.
So there's another one, WOWI career assessment, and it's one that's they charge for also. But I know Lori McLean in Washington State with her project uses that a lot with her consumers. I think there's a couple other people in Washington State that use it as well. I think, and a couple other projects across AIVRS world that use it as well. And I know TVR Institute, Laura has that, and they use it in their assessment course as well, as an example. So everybody that goes through that course takes the WOWI, just so they have experience in utilizing it.
And I just wanted to say the Career Index Plus website is free. You just go in, create an account with your email address, And then once you do that, I think you can keep the information, the reports that you run, I believe. And it is a real simple site with a lot of drop-down menus. You can do an overview for your participant, and then you can do like fit reports, you know, what fits into their criteria, any related jobs, a whole list of different types of jobs, the viability, the suitability, and any necessary training. And then you can print that whole report from that website. So that's a real good resource as well.
Casey, if you're willing to email it out to people, you want to just throw your email in the chat box? Thanks. All right, guys, any other questions? Or any other, I think the original question I asked was to tell me about your processes. So I love how these discussions just kind of go off in the directions that they do, because we get a lot of good information out there. So any other comments on your process or questions about IPE development? Well, Rachel, let's talk about post-employment services.
I have a quick question. Do you have a, AIVRS have an IPE form online?
We have, we're working currently on a case file example. And this is going to be the case file from beginning to end, from intake to application, all the way through closure, post-employment services. So we're going to have that available for people to download. It'll be also on the website once we get it up, where you can just go click and look through it, or you can download it into a paper format for you to put into a folder. Along with that, in our toolkits, the VR process toolkit will have an example of the IPE format, and it's just a template that we've developed. It's not what has to be used. You can individualize it. And then with the TVR handbook, there's also TVR handbook from the Institute. They have examples of materials in there as well. So there is some out and about. If you need something, my recommendation is to reach out to us at AIVRTTAC and do a request, and we'll get that to you.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, Rachel, what's your question on post-employment services? Okay, so RSA recently sent out guidance on post-employment services. I've only skimmed it, but I saw not only does an IPE have to be done for the post-employment services, but an application. That is not the case for AIVRS, right? And even if some choose to, or it is required, I'd imagine it could be very short, few questions. If you question one, anyone using one, guidance for state VRs. Okay, so I am not up to speed on this, so I will speak for what I know to, and then it'll be something that we do some research on, and we'll make sure that we get a response out to all of the AIVRS projects based on this question. At this point, what I know is that a post-employment service does require an IPE. Now, really what that shapes up to be is an amendment that you title post-employment services IPE. You amend that case, and from there you start identifying services that are being provided. Now, post-employment services are limited in scope, and they are time limited. So you can't have, best practices for what I've always done is like 30 days. If I can't provide a service within 30 days to help that individual maintain or stabilize their employment, then I'm going to go back into a full IPE, reopen the case, start service provision like we would normally. And like Jamie just added, no major services can be added during a post-employment services, IPE. At this point, I do not know that an application has to be taken. From what I understand, you can write in the case note that post-employment services were requested to, and you identify why they're requested. You identify the barrier towards employment that needs to be addressed to help them maintain their employment or stabilize their employment. You would identify the service that you're going to provide and the length of time and the cost in that case note. All of that would then be transferred over to a post-employment amended IPE, and you would start provision of those services based off of that rationale. But I will definitely look into what you just posted about the RSA guidance and see where it impacts us. In the CFR 371, you can look it up and it'll identify what post-employment services are required for AIVRS projects at this time. I can tell you that 371 regulation has not changed at this point. Rachel states that that's how we've done it. Case note and basically an amended IPE. Aware has its own PES IPE, but there's never been a required application. Yeah, and it's all what you label it. I mean, technically it's supposed to be labeled a post-employment service IPE, but I just go in and type in PES in front of the amended IPE. I take out the amended part, so it's PES IPE. But it's the same form I do my amendments on, or did my amendments on. Man, a bunch of good questions. I like that. Any other comments, questions? When developing an IPE, one question that's come up in popularity lately is supporting education courses in cannabis education. Any thoughts? Any thoughts? Well, I have a lot of thoughts. And I'm not going to say any of them at this point because there's been no thought passed down from RSA yet. Once they have their mind made up, then we can have a discussion about that further. Directors, the AIVRS call is tomorrow. So I recommend that you attend that AIVRS call. Casey, you said you had a post-employment service application or yeah.
Yes, we have a short one-page post-employment services application just to get information as to why they feel they need services and what's happening at their job. And then we use the TVR software in history. They have a post-employment option where we go in there and amend the IPE, and that's where we add those services in. And we have a 6-month tops post-employment services, and then that's when we reopen a case.
Thank you. So there is applications out there if people want to search out for examples. Bettina asks, what is the approach or how to document an IPE for an individual that wants to partner in a small business with someone who is not VR eligible? You cannot support the other person. You have to make that very clear. So the funds have to stay separate, and you have to identify in that what the partner is bringing to the table. So you have to show that none of the funds that you're providing are going to go to be for that partner's half. So it's basically, but then you have to identify what the partner is bringing in so that you can show where the business is going to be successful. Outside of that, it's just a standard self-employment or small business plan development process where you do And that's a whole, I mean, I've got a whole presentation on self-employment plans, how to develop it and that type of thing that we can maybe talk about at another time, because we don't have enough time in 12 minutes to go over the business plan, the development of it. But it's a very similar process. You go through, you know, getting quotes and all that type of stuff. So Bettina, email me and then I can set up I can share that with you.
Still posting answers to post-employment in the chat, so folks will have something that they can copy and paste if they want. But that is a great question, Bettina. I don't think I've ever heard that question before. Partnering with a non-VR consumer for, was it self-employment? Is that the question?
Yeah, how do you, a non-eligible participant is partnering in a self-employment plan.
Okay. Yeah, I think you hit it on the nail on the head, Wayne, when you said you just got to make sure that you document the funding source and what those funds are paying for, because that would be tricky if you are supplying funding and another individual is benefiting from those funds other than the participant. And Casey said, yeah, they had that happen with self-employment plan, but they had to make sure everything was separated. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what I was thinking too, Casey. You're going to have to make sure in that plan that you have spelled out all of the parameters, because that could get really tricky.
Yeah, we had them do 2 business plans under the same business plan, if that makes sense, because we work with our small business development center in Michigan. And we work really well with one of their people. So we explained to her the situation and she made sure that everything was spelled out. So that one business plan was our consumer and the other business plan was for the non-native person. And so we had everything spelled out and it was easier then to build the plan and make sure it was all separated.
And I'm putting the survey in the chat box. If everyone could complete that survey, that would be awesome. That really helps us. I wasn't sure, Wayne, if you wanted to include that in today's presentation or send it in the follow-up email. So, but I put it in the chat.
Yeah, we'll send it out again in the email too, but please do the survey. It helps us in moving forward with future webinar topics, and also allows us to collect your guys' feedback to help us work better.
I love when we get to the Q&A portion, because we get so much feedback from everyone on a variety of topics. And like you said earlier, Wayne, that sometimes when we go off the beaten path, we end up answering a lot more questions than we might not have received if we hadn't have just opened it up for open discussion. So I appreciate all of you guys contributing to the conversation and being willing to share information with each other and with us.
Jamie, will you provide information on the next webinar?
I sure will. Hold on just a second. I'm gonna pull it up.
So we're down to about 8 minutes. Any other questions or comments on IPE development? Nona, you want to put in your shameless plug for the CARE? Oh, Nona's doing it tomorrow. Okay. So everybody's gonna go out and create wonderful IPEs now. Mike needs a follow-up, okay?
Well, I was trying to pull this up and I was trying to paste this in the chat, but it won't let me because it's in a table format.
Yeah, it's too
But,
big.
yeah, it is. But our next, oh, I wanted to mention also, Laura Maltzy is hosting the new directors circle. That's going to be on April the 7th from 11 to 12 Mountain Standard Time. I just wanted to put that out there for any new directors that want to join that circle. And if you do, email Laura directly. And then Dr. Gassioma will be hosting a talking circle on the first 5 steps of the VR process, April the 13th. So if you just want to get on and chat a little bit about the VR process, that's outreach, referral, orientation, intake, application, and eligibility. We'll just be bouncing some information off of each other and sharing in that talking circle. And then our next webinar is April the 27th, and that will be on provision of services and allowable costs. And that will be with the TVR Institute and Rachel Allen. So I'm really looking forward to that. So that's some stuff that's coming up real soon in April. The first week of April is the new directors circle. The second week of April is the talking circle on the VR process, first 5 steps. And then again, April the 27th will be provision of services and allowable costs. And you'll be getting an email in our weekly announcements about all of those. It's good to see everybody's faces.
Jamie,
Yes.
good afternoon. This is Melinda. I just wanted to point out that RSA is also having that training for the mid-year performance report on April 7th. So I know that Laura had changed the new directors circle meeting time last month. So I don't know if she's gonna want to do that in April as well, because I'm
sure she probably will.
Yeah, so I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I'm sure she's probably already addressed it, but I'm not sure. I haven't seen the email saying the change of time, but that's what she did before, was just change the time to later in the day.
Jamie, Lyle
Yes.
again. Yeah,
Hey, Lyle.
I just kind of building upon the previous question. I did talk to Laura that also, or Laura, one of them, I let them know that about the RSA training that day, because that's going to interfere with the TVR, the Northwest Indian College course that is also going on at the same time. So there's multiple things happening, just happen to fall on the same day and within the same time frame. So I know
and that group may decide to switch that date. I'm not sure if y'all talked about it.
Yeah, the coursework, RSA won't switch the date and the coursework won't switch the date. I just encourage that when you guys plan and coordinate, that you guys coordinate together to, it's overlapping, and, I want to participate in both, but I have to choose the RSA one as the director. So.
Yes, sir.
All right, that's it.
Thank you, Lyle. Okay, 3 minutes. Anybody else have any last minute questions or comments?
Did you see Bettina's comment? She said she could pick your brain for a long time, Wayne.
It wouldn't take very long. We get to the end pretty fast.
Hey, yeah, Jackie, email Laura Maltzy at TVR Institute, and she can add you to that new director's circle.
No, Mike, we didn't. We got hit yesterday. It was 70 on Sunday and then snow or 70 on Monday and snow on Tuesday. So we didn't miss it. It hit us.
You were talking about comparable benefits. We list that as similar benefits on our IPE.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it too.
Yeah.
All right, thanks everybody. I'm glad y'all got to come see us. I enjoyed interacting with all of you. It's always nice to hear how other people are doing stuff. It helps all of us get a better understanding of some of the processes that are available. Stay safe and have fun the rest of your week. And hopefully we'll see everybody face to face soon. I'm ready to start traveling again.
Maybe it's too soon to announce anything, but I'd love to see folks at the IHD conference in June.
Yeah, we are doing an IHD conference in June. AIVRTTAC is participating. We have a couple presentation that we're doing, but we're also doing a 3-day face-to-face, for lack of a better term, VR boot camp. So it'll cover the VR process, employment, development and placement. And then we're also going to be going over assistive technology. And like Jamie said, that'll be in June. There'll be some information coming out. Everything's being confirmed this week. So we'll be sending out that information on our listserv. So be aware. And if you have carryover, you can probably talk to your project officer and maybe your program officer and see if you can get some of that carryover money spent. All right, guys, thanks for attending. It was great to see everybody's names and faces and the great discussion that we had. You guys have a great rest of your week and stay safe.
Thanks, everyone.